when the analysis is done and the results are in, the analytics project is not over. If the results are not properly communicated to others, the HR Analytics project might miss out on the impact it could have had. If you are the analyst, the project leader, a departmental manager, you'll likely have to use reporting and advising skills to sell the results to others and achieve the true business impact.
Reporting and advising. Reporting is arguably the most crucial step in the HR Analytics process. Why? Because if you've done a beautiful analysis, if you've crunched all the data and you've come up with some very interesting results, if you can't share those results to the rest of the organization, nothing will happen. Your report will just end up in a drawer somewhere in the organization and not have impact. Let's be honest, your work matters, so let's make sure that people notice. That's what this lesson is about. The golden rule, therefore, is to be proactive. People are not going to ask you about your results. No, you're going to tell other people about your results and why they matter and why they should take action. Based on our experience, we've drafted 4 golden rules in reporting analytics results and insights. Let's get started. Rule number 1, creating the right setting. It is easy to tell people about your results, but it's harder to tell the right people about your results. Make sure to report your analytics insights to the right people. Find the decision makers for whom your results are the most relevant and talk to them. If your results are actionable, these decision makers can take action and can make the impact that's needed to change things. Second, make sure that you have the right format to report your data. You can of course just email someone some interesting findings, but the problem with email is that either people forget to read it or they simply just don't understand your email or your report. So make sure you are presenting findings in person. Also, when you're there in person, you can be on the one hand more convincing, and on the other hand, you can answer all the questions that the others might have. Of course, there are exceptions. If someone asks every month for the same report, sending it via email might suffice. But when you present something new, something that has impact and something that hasn't been done before, you want to be there in real life in front of that person and be able to answer all the questions that they have and present your findings in the most convincing way possible. It's not just about being there, it's also about how you tell it, how you pitch your results. The golden rule is to get to the point within the first 5 minutes. Why? Because managers and especially executives have limited time and usually a short attention span. You don't really want to waste minutes on introductions, on telling what HR Analytics is and on how it can help the company. No, just get straight to the point and get to the results. This is a business problem in the company. This is what's happening. This is why it happens. And this is how we can solve it if we implement it right. Additionally, focus on the main findings and don't focus on the details. Don't tell the receiver about statistics. Don't tell them about confidence intervals or whatever. Tell them about the actionable insights that they can work with. And of course, if they ask questions about statistical tests, about where you got the data from, or about how you're so sure about your conclusions, you can go into more details. But don't bring up those details without being asked for them, because that's one of the traps that a lot of detail-oriented people fall into. They start to describe the process in detail because they think they can convince others by just describing the process. But as you'll learn later in this lesson, a lot of managers are not necessarily data-minded. They are primarily result-oriented. So they basically want you to cut the crap and they want you to get to the point. And that's what you need to do when you give advice to managers. And finally, make your findings actionable. Your findings need to be actionable and you need to present them in an actionable way. Don't tell the manager that the relationship between employee engagement and customer net promoter score has an R² of 0.3. No, tell them that their highest engaged employees have 30% higher net promoter scores for their clients compared to employees with low engagement scores. So, if the company can get its engagement scores up, net promoter scores will increase by 30%, which will make the average NPS close to 5 out of 5. This means that people are very likely to promote your product to others, come back and buy a second and a third time, and you'll make more money in the end. And even better, try to relate your Net Promoter Score to bottom line performance, to business outcomes. If you can make the relationship between your engagement scores via your Net Promoter Score to hard cash, which is bottom line revenue or annual recurring revenue, if you find those relationships, you can make it very actionable and you can say, hey, do these actions and they'll result in these specific financial returns. This is actionability to the max. And, by the way, be prepared to answer the question, so how will we do this? Make an action plan with the 3 to 5 most effective actions to get to the result. As I already said, don't talk statistics. Talk about the business. Use examples and make it prescriptive. Say, if you take these actions, this will be your financial result. That's how you make it prescriptive, and that's how you will guide the manager. Guide the executive into taking the appropriate action that will help the workforce and help the company. How convincing you are doesn't always rely on what you say. It's also how you say it. That's why data visualization comes in, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you can summarize all the information that you have in 1, 2, 3 graphics, then you can oftentimes be way more convincing than by just telling it to them without showing the graphs. One of the things that I hear managers always say is, I'm a visual person. I always dislike that phrase because I think everyone is a visual person. However, I never fight it and I always give them the visuals, because visuals are convincing. In the course material for this week, I'll link to a Harvard Business Review article titled The Quick and Dirty on Data Visualization. This 2014 article asks the reader 5 questions before they display the data. First of all, am I presenting or am I circulating? Because when you present something, it needs to be simple, it needs to be easy to understand. However, when you're circulating data, for example in dashboards, people take more time to explore the data for themselves, and you put more depth in your data. Second, am I using the right kind of chart or table? What message am I trying to convey, and what is the best way to visualize this? Do my visuals accurately reflect the number? And are my data memorable? I would say read the article, because it combines well with what you've learned in this lesson. Besides the question in the article, you can ask yourself the questions that you learned in this lesson. Is my data actionable? Am I presenting it in the right way? And am I presenting to the right people? We've just talked about 4 tips for reporting your data, but how about advising the business? This goes hand in hand with reporting the data. The golden rule for advising as an analyst or as a business partner is make sure that your work will have impact. You are advising with a specific purpose. So how do we make this happen? The first tip is to advise the right people. Don't limit yourself to volunteers who are willing to free up their time. No, talk to the business leaders, the executives, the directors, and the senior managers. Talk to the policymakers and to the advisors. Make sure that you're in front of the right people and you get access to those people. Don't be afraid, be bold. Send them an email saying, hey, I see you're struggling with this problem. We have analyzed it and we've come up with these results. I'd love to have a cup of coffee with you and talk about how this can help you. And then you can have a 20-minute session with this person, which adds a lot of value for them. This will help them to see the value of your work and your advice. Second, be prepared and be in the lead. Being in the lead may be the most important thing here. Before you start with your analysis and before you start with HR analytics, you inquire about the problems within the organization. So you know what business leader is struggling with what problem. Approach them, say, hey, this is what you're struggling with. That's what you told me a few months ago. This is what we found in the data. This is what we've identified, and this is how you can solve your problem. So prepare not only your conversation with the executives, but also continuously scan the organization to identify new problems to tackle. Not too long ago, I watched the movie Margin Call, where Jeremy Irons says the following. There are 3 ways to make a living in this business. Be first, be smarter, or cheat. Well, I don't cheat. And although I like to think that we have some pretty smart people here in the room, it sure as hell is a lot easier to just be first. I think this holds true for your advice work as well. Be in the lead, because if you can lead, if you can trigger people, and if you can identify problems and you can proactively come up with solutions, you will make the most impact. Third, have your facts and figures ready. When you talk to managers, when you talk to the executives, they will challenge you on your numbers. So make sure you know where your data comes from and you know how the data is structured. And make sure to back your statements with data if asked, and remember that you are the expert. Be honest, but don't hesitate when they ask you a question, because hesitation is killing. It kills your credibility. Make sure to have your answers ready, and if they challenge you, don't be afraid to dig into the details. A side note is that oftentimes HR data differs from financial data. This is something you need to keep in mind when you talk to someone in finance. They can say, hey, interesting data, but we have different data. That's a challenge that you need to think about and that you need to prepare an answer to. And oftentimes it has to do with different definitions of what constitutes a full-time equivalent or headcount, for example. But also on data that's just out of date or just messy data. Knowing the weaknesses of your own data is important, but then still, if you get challenged, you say, hey, maybe we're 5% off. Maybe it's 5% higher or it's 5% lower. But the effect we're seeing, even if it's 5% higher or lower, it still has an impact on. And then you do your story again. In other words, you don't always need to have 100% accuracy in your data in order to make a point and to convince someone of the truth, relevance, and actionability of your analysis. Don't be afraid if you get challenged on your data. Just remember that you are the expert. You know your data. Answer the questions and don't be afraid to say, hey, our data is not perfect. And maybe you shouldn't say it, but their data also isn't perfect. But even with data that's a 95% perfect, you can still come up with very valid insights. Don't be afraid to challenge them on their data as well and agree to disagree on data definitions that haven't been fully crystallized. And 4, get the right training. Make sure your conversation techniques are up to date, because you're talking to managers and executives and they are result driven. They usually have dominant personalities and they're controlling conversations and they're controlling situations. That's why they ended up being a manager in the first place. Their personality is often characterized as fast-paced and outspoken. So the way you convince them is different than how you convince your neighbor. When you convince a manager, make sure to give them a compliment. To give them a pat on the back and say, hey, you're doing really, really well. And you can do even better when you take care of. And then you come up with your findings. Make sure that you have the conversation techniques that you need and you can convince the kind of people that usually don't like criticism. Keep practicing and you'll get better in giving advice to managers and executives. And lastly, train not only yourself but also train your HR business partners and your HR advisors. Why? Because they are an important channel to distribute your findings, the actionable results that you come up with, to the manager. The HR business partners and advisors are in frequent contact with those managers and they help to advise them. That's why your advisors and BPs can form an important channel of distributing your data and insights to the rest of the organization. That's why it's important to train them to become more data savvy. They don't need to be data experts, but you want to encourage them to work with data. Ideally, you don't want to see them go to the manager with a blank block note, like a tabula rasa, and they start talking to the manager and they say, hey, what's your problem and how can I help? No, you want them to look in the system, to look at your HR data first and say, these are the pressure points in this manager's department. He has high turnover, or he has high absenteeism, or he has a shortage of certain skills, or he's at risk of losing certain skills that are really important and hard to replace, etc., etc. If your business partner goes to the manager and says, hey, I think you're doing well, but if you improve these specific areas, you'll do even better, then the manager will be more likely to work with your business partner and listen. I've trained a lot of HR business partners in analytics. A tip for training them is to first motivate them about analytics by sharing a number of success stories and then challenging them and letting them think how they can leverage data for their advantage. Ask them, which data can you use to give even better advice to managers and to help employees even more? This question usually provides a plethora of HR and business issues that can be solved using data. If you make this click for them and make this data available on the most important topics that they brought up, they'll be more likely to work with this data. That's it for this lesson on reporting and advising.